Hey, I'm Ben Avery. This is Strangers and Aliens, and today I'm asking the question, Destiny's Edge, Dawn of Destiny, is it worth reading? Hey there, I'm Ben Avery, and this is Strangers and Aliens, a podcast about the intersection of science fiction and spirituality, of fantasy and faith, of creativity and Christianity. And for this episode, I am taking a look at Lee Stevens' book, Destiny's Edge, Dawn of Destiny. Destiny's Edge is the series, Dawn of Destiny is the book. This is book one of the Ennealogy. I don't know much about what his plans for the series are, but I did get this book for free from him because I said I'd be interested in talking about it on the podcast. And it has been way too long for me to actually. I really do. I kind of feel bad because I have a lot of things on my to be read pile. I mean, a lot of things, but certain things, the pile, it's it's a sliding scale of preferences and priorities. And this was something I did make into a priority, and I really should have done this video a long time ago, but I didn't. And so, as people know, when I do the "Is It Worth Reading" series, and I'm talking about something old, like The Force of Star Wars, the answer might be no, it's not worth reading. Now, that is, I'm pretty sure I said it was worth reading, but the answer might be no if it's old. If it's new and independently produced, I'm probably not going to talk about it at all here on the channel because it's not fair for me to do. There's a lot of work that goes into creating a book like this. I know because I've created books like this. There's a lot of work that goes into it. I've done this book here, Goes to the Future. This is my sci-fi book that actually, if you like what I'm going to talk about Destiny's Edge, you might like this book. There's some similarities. Actually, his book has a lot more faith elements that are involved. I also have this book right here. This is the first time I'm showing this. This is Time Pieces, a triptych through time. 3 Tales of Time Travel by Ben Avery, and I can't wait to put this out there so you can get a chance to read these stories. It's 3 stories, 3 novellas, and they're all linked together by a plot element. Well, time travel, obviously, but there's a little bit more to it than that. But anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about Lee and Dawn of Destiny. Now, this book I enjoyed. I enjoyed quite a bit, and it's interesting because of it's basically it is. It reminded me of a number of different things. It reminded me of Space Above and Beyond. It reminded me of Starship Troopers. It reminded me of Aliens, especially Part Two. It reminded me of This Present Darkness, which I'll talk about why in a moment. It's not because angels and demons, but I'll explain why in a moment. And it reminded me of the Book of Esther. so, so there's that. Um, so let's kind of start with, I guess, the things that reminded me of the different sci-fi things that reminded me of. This is a military sci-fi action book. There is a lot of action in this book. There are aliens, but this is Independence Day is another thing that this could possibly remind someone of, or V even a little bit. This is about an alien invasion, and the alien invasion has taken place, and there are then excursions all around the world. There are places in the world where it's relatively safe, and there are places in the world that are relatively not, and then there are places in the world where there is active conflict going on, and they're trying to figure out what's the deal with these aliens. What's the deal with these aliens? They're trying to figure out why the aliens have done what they have done. Why did they invade? Why, and they're just trying to figure out who these aliens are and what these aliens are. And as they're doing this, our main character, whose name is Scott, he's a soldier, and it turns out he's really good at what he does, and he has a very natural ability with leadership, and so he's kind of rising through the ranks, maybe a little faster than most people think he should, and so he has a core group of characters that are gathered around him, and they are all well written as far as the personalities go and that sort of thing. Scott himself is also, oh man, can't remember if he's married or if they're engaged. I can't remember now. But he has a significant other who is Nicole, and he's in contact with her, but it's a long distance relationship basically they end up in, and it's hard for them to basically keep the faith. And the good thing is they love the Lord and they love each other, and that comes through. But there are some natural conflicts that come out of that, and that's one of the things, probably one of the biggest things that I appreciated about this book was that that personal conflict that came from this relationship, where he is trying to just do his best as a soldier, but he's got this person back home that he loves, and she is trying to figure out, how can I support him while he's gone? He's trying to figure out, how can I support her while I'm gone? What can we do? How do we do this? And when they're keeping basically keeping their eyes on Jesus, as they're keeping their, trying to stay connected with each other, as when they're connected with God, they're connected with each other, and it's much, much better for them. And so I appreciated that. And that's one of the things that the portrayal of the prayer life was something that I wrote down in my notes. It caused me to think about my own prayer life. And that's why it kind of reminded me of this present darkness, was because as much of the spiritual stuff that was going on in this, which is much different than in this book. In this book is a very realistic spirituality that's going on, where you have the people, and they are, talking about prayer, and they're doing all these things. Whereas with this one, I shouldn't say unrealistic, but unrealistic, where you have the warrior garbed demons and the comic book hero angels, and the focus on that caused me to think about, how do I interact with the spiritual realm? And it did cause me to think about some different things about, my own life, as I look at my own spiritual life and the spiritual warfare going on around me. While I don't think it is exactly as portrayed in this book, what's good about this book was that it was causing us to think about that. Well, it's something similar here, where as they are talking through things and as they are working through the relationship, they, with their prayer time and praying for each other and praying for, his teammates and things like that, it caused me to think about my own prayer life. I would like to have seen more development of the aliens and kind of what the spirituality was of the aliens, but that's what sequels are for. And there's a lot of development of the other characters around them. But that spiritual side, it did get me thinking about the spirituality of the aliens, and those questions of, if aliens exist, what does that mean about, God's relationship with them and the fallen nature of the world? And I am curious if Lee Stephen is going to get into some of those ideas and concepts, where right now the aliens make for a great other, but they do bring up some of those questions a little bit in here about, like, well, does God love them? That kind of thing. So it's interesting. The Christian themes are front and center. Okay. Now they're meaningful, especially to believers, but I would imagine that in some ways, someone who is outside of the faith would read this, and they would either be able to say, I am experiencing vicariously, as you do in books, where when you read books, you are experiencing someone else's life, someone other than you. And so I think one of the biggest benefits for someone who's not a believer, other than just seeing the example and seeing these ideas of just God's relationship with us, to see, like, okay, so this is kind of what it looks like when you have someone who's devoted to God and devoted to their spouse. This is what it looks like. And it's encouraging in that way too, to me. I also really appreciated the main theme, and I talked about that relationship that they had as he's spending time away from her and he's on the front lines, not even necessarily on the front lines, but he ends up being in the midst of these battles. And basically the kind of big theme is, where you are is where God can use you, and God put you there for a reason. And that's what took me to the book of Esther, is where you are, God can use you, and God put you there for a reason. In fact, Lee actually signed the book, and he signed it, "May God put you in the places you need to be." Enjoy the book. So yeah. So there's 3 parts in this. Part 1 is where I was really reminded of Starship Troopers, Space Above and Beyond. And there was some battles that were going on that really kind of took me into that Starship Troopers kind of mindset. Part 2 reminded me of Aliens, as they are going and they're investigating a place where there's an alien infestation. And I mean, the way it's written is almost like a haunted house. It's not, but it's kind of that idea of, the first movie, Alien, in the franchise, was basically a haunted house in space. Well, this isn't in space, but it kind of has that vibe going on, where as they're moving around from place to place, there's who knows what's around every corner, and the power got cut, things like that. And then part 3 is back to Starship Troopers. Now, what was interesting about part 3 is that put them in Russia, and they were actually in conflict with some of the other soldiers that they were with. Now, there's kind of this unified world military force that's working together, but that doesn't mean that everyone's getting along. And so they definitely were not getting along with the Russian soldiers that they were working with. And then the Russian soldiers did not think well of them either. And yeah, and so there were some interesting things that went beyond just, Starship Troopers or whatever. But recently I've been watching Space Above and Beyond, and I also just recently read Starship Troopers. And of course, I love aliens. So those are all things that are kind of in the front of my head as I was reading this. But again, it kind of takes it in its own direction. And yeah, if there's one complaint I would have, it would be that, and I don't know if I can call it a complaint, because it's one of the things that's kind of integral to the theme of the story, that Scott is just really good at what he does, and it comes naturally to him, even though he doesn't even know he's kind of skilled in looking ahead, thinking forward. It kind of gets into how when he played football, that's the way it was for him. He was able to look ahead and think forward, and he does that. And so even when he's not in control or in command, when the people who are in command get kind of taken out, he's able to rise above and start saying, okay, we need to do this and this and this, and it works out. And so in some ways you might say, well, is that a Mary Sue kind of a character, or is that a Gary Lou? I don't know what they call the male version of a Mary Sue. But at the same time, it's also really digging into that whole idea of where you are is where God can use you, and God put you there for a reason. And that's something that very valid, and so here you have a guy who has these exact talents, these exact abilities, these exact um, uh, personality traits, and all these things together make for what was needed in these situations. And so in some ways, yes, it might be an author creating a Mary Sue who can do all the things that needs to be done and do them really, really well. But then also you can kind of look at it and say, well, that's what God does, though. Not that he makes us all perfect and amazing, and not that Scott is perfect and amazing. He's not, and he doubts himself. He's trying to figure things out himself, and even when he's making choices, he's kind of second guessing: is this the best command decision, or whatever it might be? But that's what God does. God places us into our circles of influence, and we are where we are for a reason. And we are where we are because we are there to influence the people around us. And we are there, and when I say influence, I don't mean just like tell them what to think. Be an influencer in that sense, but to influence our surroundings by showing love and by being God's hands and feet, and by listening with God's ears, and watching with God's eyes, and speaking with God's word, and being who we are to the people around us, to minister to them, and to yeah, shine the light, shine God's light, and let people know about Jesus. And the whole idea of, preach the word and use, or preach the gospel, use words when necessary, kind of a thing. Yeah, and that's where I would say, even if you hate where you are and you don't like your job, or this, that, the other thing, I'm not saying that you have to turn around and just suddenly love your job, okay? But I am saying, while you're in your job that you hate, look for the places where people need to hear from God, and people need to hear from you that they are loved, and that he loves even them. And yeah, so that's kind of what the things I kind of got out of this book. And I do believe that that is a message that was definitely, I don't know if he sat down and said, that's the message I'm going to start with, or if that's what kind of came out of the story as he was writing it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because the story itself is good. There's a lot of good stuff going on, action and adventure, and there's wonder. And that's something that I appreciate about sci-fi is wonder, where where you're there's a sense of wonder, like, wow, this is amazing, this is some wild stuff, this is stuff I can't experience on Earth. But there's also a sense of I wonder what's going to happen next, or I wonder what's around the corner, or I wonder what's inside this ship that they just went into. So yeah, is it worth reading? Yes. Yes, it is. So I do recommend you seek this out. If you do seek this out, tell them Ben sent you. And also be on the lookout for timepieces here coming in a month or two. I'm not sure when it's going to be. I do have to do some final edits here. And if it's your kind of thing, check out my sci-fi book, Ghosts of the Future. And also please hit like, hit subscribe, and check out the audio podcast over on strangersandaliens.com. Now, a lot of the audio podcast material is also here on YouTube. But yeah, so those are all the things. Those are all the things I'm going to ask you to do. And until next time, thank you for spending time with me. Thank you for listening to me ramble on and on about basically a book that I like, which is the best thing. That's what I enjoy talking about, is stuff that I like, that I think you might like too. So Destiny's Edge, Dawn of Destiny by Lee Stephen. Is it worth reading? Yes, it is. You knew it was going to be as soon as I turned on the camera because it's modern and it's small press, but doesn't mean I shouldn't talk about it, right? So thanks again for spending time, and I'll see you later. Godspeed. What's the deal with these aliens?